Welcome to the Living to 100 Club podcast. Here's our host, Dr. Joseph Casciani.
Well, hello to all of our listeners joining us today on our podcast. You're listening to one of our successful aging episodes this month on the Living to 100 Club program, and I'm your host, Joe Casciani. On each program, our conversations educate and inspire, helping you get the best out of all the years we're given, regardless of what obstacles come our way. You can learn more about my club at my website. Be sure to take a look at my new training and activities manual, Better, Longer, and Happier, a guide to aging with purpose and positivity. It's a series of 12 modules in a card deck format developed for senior living communities. Take a look at the website, living200.club/BLH for a closer look at the modules. Now on to our program. In today's episode, we talk with Jim Cosco, owner of Tipping Point Labs, about his inspiring work in creating legacy videos. Jim shares his passion for preserving personal stories through video production, motivated by his own experience of missing the opportunity to capture his father's life story before he passed away. Together, we explore the power of video to document memories and how these personal narratives can provide lasting comfort and connection for loved ones. First, a little background. With almost 3 decades of experience in the media industry, Jim is the founder and executive producer of Tipping Point Labs, a video strategy and production company that specializes in telling brand stories. Corporate clients have included 5-Star Senior Living, Phillips Lifeline, Harvard University, Keurig, and John Hancock. Over the years, he's also filmed content for MTV, Fox News, Nightline, and The Today Show, and as well as work with notables like Lisa Gibbons, Geraldo Rivera, Tim Russert, Aerosmith, and celebrity chef Curtis Stone. Jim is also the founder of Legacy Video Stories, a company he was inspired to create after his father passed away, so he could help families preserve their stories for future generations. Jim, welcome to our program today.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you for that introduction. It was wonderful. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. Thank you for joining us. You've covered a lot of territory, Jim, over the years, and I always like to ask our guests to maybe share the highlights or what were the key moments that brought you to where you are today.
Well, I started my career early on in local news and journalism, and I worked in production. I've worked in almost every aspect of television production and journalism you can think of. And as you said, I started a company about 20 years ago called Tipping Point Labs, which tells brand stories. So I've gone from telling public interest stories early in my career to brand stories, what makes Keurig's coffee so special, why is Harvard so unique as a place to go study, things like that. Mm-hmm. And now I'm shifted my focus to this, what I call legacy videos. And I have a company called Legacy Video Stories. And now I'm telling personal stories. So, Joe, I went to making videos for brands, which I still do. And the goal of making a video for a brand is to get, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of views for a video. The goal to making a personal documentary or personal legacy video, the audience is much smaller. It's, instead of broadcasting, it's narrowcasting. I might do an interview with a senior, and their immediate family is going to watch it, anywhere from 2 to 12 people maybe, and that's okay because it's important and it's the right 2 to 12 people that need to watch it.
So yeah, I know when we spoke earlier, you shared the story of your father and how you had really wanted the opportunity to record that, and you missed the
Yeah.
opportunity.
Let
Yeah.
me let I mean I think I learned a valuable lesson, and then let me, if you don't mind, I'll tell your audience a little bit
Yeah,
about it because I
please.
think it's a
Sure.
lesson they should know too. So, as you know, I've been doing this for 30 years. I have a company where I own all sorts of TV production equipment, high-end equipment, and I do interviews and videos for a living. When my dad turned 75 years old, I said, "Hey, Dad, I do this for a living, but how about I bring my cameras to your house someday and I sit down with you and do an interview on video to talk about your life story, to talk about where we came from as a family, and you can tell me about, your grandparents and parents and how you met mom and what it was like to be a dad. I would love to know this stuff, and we haven't really talked about that." And Joe, if you knew my dad, he was so excited to do it. He's a
Oh.
salesman for most of his life. He was a talker. He was a great storyteller. And he said, "Yeah, let's do that. That'd be great." You know, I left that day with, planning to do it, but, we're going to do it next weekend, next month. Years went by,
Yeah.
and, life gets in the way, like everybody,
Sure.
things get
Yeah.
busy and things get in the way. And, unfortunately, he passed away last year at the age of 83. And I never actually did this with him. And so when he passed away, I thought, that was such a missed opportunity. But it didn't really click right away when he passed away. What really, when I really thought about it again, was around last holidays, around December. It had been about 3 months or so since he passed away.
Mhm.
And I sent around a Zoom call that I recorded with my family because during COVID, my mom turned 80. And like everyone during COVID, we found different ways to connect with each other. We were, Zooming or doing whatever. And I
Sure.
put together this 80th birthday Zoom call for my mom, where, it was like a "This is your life" Zoom call. And during the call, at different stages, different groups of friends and relatives in her life came in. So at one point, her grandkids were on, then they chopped off, and her high school friends came on, then they hopped off, and then her brothers and sisters came on. And it was about 2 hours of this, and it was like really nice and special. It was a great way
Yeah.
to celebrate her birthday.
Yeah.
She loved it. So I sent this video around, to remind my brothers and sisters about the Zoom call. Hey, like, watch the Zoom call. Remember, it was really fun. I just found it on my computer. I think you'll get a kick out of watching it. They watched it and they got back to me, and the reaction was surprised me a little bit. They said, it was great to see Jim. It was great to relive the call with mom. But what really got us was seeing dad again on video. It had
Mm.
been a few months since he had passed away.
Mm.
And in the beginning of the call, he's like setting the computer up. He's happy. He's jovial. He's joking around, trying to get my mom on board because it was a surprise, and, like
Mm.
making jokes and just having fun. And my sister was like, "It was really good to see dad again on video and to see,
Mm.
his expressions." And that's when it really clicked, Joe. I was like, I thought back to that day when I wanted to, we agreed that I'd interview him. And that's when I said, "Oh man, I really missed that opportunity." People really would have liked to have seen that interview now that he's gone. And so I said, I'm not going to make that mistake. I sat my mom down within 2 weeks and did an
Oh,
interview
well.
with her.
Yeah.
I launched the website legacyvideostories.com, within a couple of weeks, and started to talk about it. And there's nothing like seeing somebody on video with their expressions and their mannerisms that really will bring back that connection. So I know there's a lot of, we talked about, you talked about why video is important. There's a lot of ways to preserve your memory and preserve your legacy and to tell your stories to your kids and your grandkids and to future generations. I happen to think, because I'm a video producer, that video is probably the best way to do it, but there
Mhm.
are other ways to do it too. And I'm not discounting any of the other ways.
Sure.
I'm just a big advocate. Since I made that mistake, I'm a big advocate that everybody should think about some way to do it, and
Mm.
to do it today, not put it off until tomorrow,
Yeah.
not put it off
Mm.
until next week, because you never know when next week's going to be, if you'll have next week.
Yes.
So I think they should do it and they'll never regret it.
Not put it off. That's a valuable message, Jim. So it's really the heart-to-heart, one-on-one conversation that you have with maybe a parent or a loved one, and you can now share it. You can now share this with other people who also care about this person. So I think I can see the rationale there. Before we jump into some of the themes, but maybe you could tell us, what are the packages that you offer with Legacy Video Stories? Just give us
Sure.
a kind of umbrella.
Sure. So I offer a baseline package, which is called a legacy interview. And I call that it's the interview of a lifetime because it really is. You sit down with me and we talk about your life, your whole life. Um, and that's about a 60 to 90-minute interview, done on location at the person's house, 60-minute style cameras and lighting. It looks great. And I call that a legacy interview. It's the baseline package. And it goes all the way up to, a custom documentary that is way more in depth and way longer, right? That's edited and has pictures and movies and might have other people commenting in their life too. And that's like a custom kind of thing. And I do that as well. And I'm working with a client now to put his life story together in a longer format and 45-minute kind of mini movie, I would so to speak. But I always do steer people towards that legacy interview, that baseline product, because I'll tell you why we talk for 90 minutes. And for most seniors, that's about all they can really manage. That's a long time. We talk for 90 minutes about everything from, their early childhood, their where their family came from, what their grandparents did, what they can remember growing up, which are important things because if you don't tell those stories about, where you came from, your grandkids, you might never know that. They might never find that out, and also we talk about things like um what's the hardest thing you ever had to do? How would you want to be remembered? Um, how did you propose to your wife? Just kind of easy questions, but then complex questions like what's the meaning of life? What's the one most valuable lesson? Who really taught you things, um, or shaped your ethos in life? Things you might have to really think about to
Mhm.
to answer. But I steer people towards this package, this legacy interview package, because I could take that 90-minute interview and edit it down to the 10 best minutes of it, right? And hand that over to you and say, here's your interview, Joe. Um, it's 10 minutes, you'll get through it. You'll love it. You'll love hearing these stories. But you're going to watch that and you're going to say, that was great. Where's the other 60 minutes? Like, what else
Uh-huh.
did my dad
Yeah.
or my mom
Yeah.
say?
Yeah.
And I would show that to you too. But like you you really want to know. I think part of the beauty of it is seeing your loved one pause, think about it, laugh, make a mistake, start again, really try to get the right words. Like you're gonna want to see the whole thing,
Sure.
especially God forbid when they pass away.
Yeah.
It's gonna be what you have to and you know what, Joe, when they pass away, everybody grieves differently, as you know, right? Everybody has a different way to handle it. Some people might watch this video once, or some people might watch it every day for the next 2 or 3 months as they try to cope with the loss of their loved one. And
Mhm.
that's okay. Either way, completely okay.
Sure. Yeah. So you can get the polished, edited version down to 10 minutes or so. And you also have the raw, unedited version. And people, as you say, prefer that unedited version because you see the humanity, you see the reality, you
You
see
see
the
who they really
M's
are.
and the haws. And yeah, um, maybe the hesitation or the snickers, as you say. So I can see that. But also, people want the kind of consumer version, right? They want the nice, short, polished version. So you have both. I can see
Yeah,
that.
I have both. So I talk to them about what their objective is, why they want it, and steer them one way or the other. But yes, we can go all the way up to a full scale Ken Burns style documentary with
Hmm.
pictures and
Oh yeah,
and home movies and things like that.
yeah.
So
Well,
either way, we can do it.
sure. So you cover a broad range. So can you share some of the maybe some challenges that you've encountered with some of the folks you've interviewed, and some of the barriers that maybe you hadn't anticipated?
Well, I'll tell you a challenge that I have anticipated, and it's not a challenge of pulling this off, right? It's not a challenge of the production,
Hmm.
but it's a challenge of the sales cycle.
Oh.
And the biggest challenge is convincing somebody that they need to do this and they need to do it quickly. And, I'll get a lot of people saying, I see why I should do this, but I have an iPhone, I have a recorder, I can do this on my own. And my answer to that is all 100% of the time, my answer to that is that's fantastic. You should do it. If you're not going to, you do it on your own. If you're not going to do it with me, and I don't take any offense to it, right? I totally understand. You should do it somehow. Do it with your iPhone. do it via scrapbooking or journaling. Maybe do it just by having, weekly dinners with your loved one and
Mm.
record them, and make sure this time when you're talking to them, you talk about, things you wouldn't normally talk about it. So when they say I can do this on my own, I tell them, you're right. You can do this on your own, and you should do this on your own. So that is a challenge of a sales cycle challenge more so than a um, personal challenge. As
Mhm.
far as a personal challenge of maybe the secondary challenge might be, sometimes a senior might not think they're interesting. You might have a senior who just doesn't think he led an extraordinary life. And, we're all not, Bill Clinton. We're all not Steven Tyler from Aerosmith. We all haven't led these rock star awesome lives.
Mm.
But every single person has led a life that is interesting in some way. They all have stories and value to pass down to other generations. And I guarantee that every single person that has kids or grandkids, those kids and grandkids, that family wants to hear these stories. Whether you think it's boring or not, convincing them that, you should get on camera, you should talk about yourself. Because your kids want to hear this, your family wants to hear this. It's important for you to do it because if you don't do it, you know, your family history is going to disappear eventually. It will only take one or two generations for people to forget about you and to forget
Mm.
about your dad and your mom and your grandparents, where you
Sure.
came from, all the important things that you take for granted as a senior. It'll take one or two generations, and that's gone if you don't talk
Mm.
about it.
Mhm.
And this is a good way to sit down and make sure that it's talked about and told
Yeah.
and recorded for future
Yeah.
generations and
Well, that's
posterity.
so important. Thanks for sharing that, Jim. When you describe the whole process of encouraging someone to record this, regardless of how they do it, maybe with their iPhone or whatever, or your system. I think what you're talking about is process over content, because to me, it's the process of getting something done. It's more important than how it gets done or what gets done or what it looks like. It's just the process of going through it. So what you're advocating is the real importance to preserve these memories and kind of acknowledge, like you said, everybody has a story. It may not be a famous story, it may not be book worthy, but everybody has a story to tell. So that's the advantage there. Yeah.
You're absolutely right about process, by the way,
Yeah.
because no matter how you do it, whether you do it through a video, whether you do it through scrapbooking, journaling, however you want to do it, sitting down and telling your story can be overwhelming and
Mm.
it can be discouraging. You might not get started because it's just an overwhelming thing, right? A lot of people, I've met seniors that say, "Oh, I tried to write my autobiography," and people retire, they have time to do things like this, and so they say, I tried to write my autobiography, or I did write my autobiography. It's all about process and it's all about how you do it. I have a quote from Mark Twain that I really
Mm.
like.
Mm.
He says, "The secret to getting ahead is getting started, and the secret to getting started is breaking your complex, overwhelming tasks into small, manageable tasks and starting on the first one."
Yeah.
And so that's what I advocate. I advocate that just you have to get started. Don't let it seem like it's so overwhelming that you don't get started.
Mhm.
Get started and start with the first task. Just start. And I tell people to start simple and get complex. Start with the easy things to answer, which is documenting where I lived as a kid, what my grandparents' names were, what their occupations were, what my where I grew up, what street I grew up on, what my house was like. Simple things that are
Mm.
factual, which are
Mm.
interesting to people still, and then get more complex with these questions that are, the meaning of life kind of questions that we
Sure.
talk
Yeah.
about. And
Yeah.
so
The
it's a
disappointments.
process.
Yeah. 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 Sorry. Yeah. Starting with the simple, and I think it's taking small steps, turtle steps, right? One tiny step is better than a big, ambitious goal 6 months from now.
Absolutely. I tried to write a book in my 20s and 30s,
Yeah.
and it's still on my shelf. I'm still trying to write it. But during that time, I read a bunch of books from authors who also had written books. Like Stephen King wrote this great book called On Writing. And another person is an author called Anne Lamott. She wrote a book called Bird by Bird.
Mm.
And basically it's about how to get started writing a book, whether it's a novel or whatever kind of book. And her like lesson, why it's called Bird by Bird, is that she recounts a story about herself as a young kid, probably in the sixth grade, 10 years old. And she was at the dining room table trying to write a paper that was due the very next day, and she was in tears. And her dad said to her, Anne, like, what's the matter? And she said, well, Dad, I have to write this report tomorrow. It's due. And I can't. It's just I don't know where to start. And he said, well, what's the report on? She said, well, I have to write this report about birds. And he's like, okay, well, what she's like all these birds we studied. And he's like, okay, well, don't panic, Anne. Like, start with the first bird, write about that one, and move on to the next bird until you're done. Go
Mm,
bird by bird.
mm,
And she's like, calm down.
mm.
She was probably up for many hours afterwards writing it, but like it had a system. It
Yeah.
was simple. She just had to start it and go bird by bird. And if you want to go and if you want to, apply that to your life, start, you know,
Mm,
with your childhood and just go month by month, year by year, however you want to do it, but just
yeah.
start and go little at a time because you'll get it. You'll get through it. You'll just go bird by bird and you get through it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I use the analogy of, weight loss. People have these big goals. I want to lose 10 pounds in 6 months. And, I say, look, let's start with what am I going to do tomorrow that I'm not doing today? That's where the behavior change starts. Not
Absolutely.
here are all the things I have to do over the next 6 months. So that's exactly right. I love that analogy, bird by bird. And it is. It's otherwise it seems so daunting. So have you encountered interviewees who are reluctant to talk about themselves or maybe have memory problems and can't recall a lot of their history?
So yes, and that's okay. We sit down, have a bunch of questions. Some, especially people with memory loss, right? Some spark things more than others. If they get flustered, you just move on. You don't have to, you don't have to keep asking the same question. You don't want to get frustrated yourself, as with someone with memory loss, right? If they say they don't know something or they're saying something that
Mhm.
you don't tell them they're wrong, right? You just go with it and you
Mhm.
and you go on to the next thing.
Mhm.
And I haven't done a lot of interviews where it's a memory issue, but one or two. And as you know, if somebody has early onset dementia or Alzheimer's, they remember things that, they don't remember things from like last week, but
Right.
they remember some deep things from their life. And you can get them to talk about things that you wouldn't expect, things that, happened a while ago. And as long as you're open-ended and as long as you kind of go with how they want to talk about the interview, it's not structured. Shouldn't be structured in that case. You'll find parts, you'll hear parts of that interview and that conversation where, you know, your mom or your dad, they're like kind of back because they're talking about something they remember. And just even if it's just a little bit of that interview, like that's
Mhm.
worth, everything. That's
Yeah.
worth everything.
Yeah. So preserving our legacy. Legacy Video Stories, the name of your company. How do you define legacy? What is that? How do we how do we describe that?
That's a good question. There's if you look up legacy in the dictionary, there's like a few different definitions, right? One is a gift by will, especially money or property, right? Somebody might define their legacy as, hey, here's my house I'm handing down to my kids or my business that I've handed down, and it's like something big and valuable to them, and that's like their legacy, right? The other definition is something transmitted or received from an ancestor from the past, just
Hmm.
something, and that's how I define it. And that's how I think about it in this case, rather. So that something could be a story, that something could be an object that's not of great value. And
Hmm.
I'll tell you a quick story if you'll indulge me about that kind of thing.
Sure.
You know, my dad and mom moved from Chelsea, an apartment in Chelsea, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston, when I was about 3. I was the fourth kid to come along. They were living in a two-bedroom or three-bedroom apartment. I was the one that made the apartment too big. They had to find a place to go. So they bought a fixer-upper, a total fixer-upper in a suburb, moved there, fixed the house up. We lived there for 30 years. Eventually the day came when my dad had to sell the property and downsize. And he jammed all of his possessions into this moving truck.
Mm.
Um, and um, moved to their new house. But when they jammed all the stuff into the moving truck, one of the things my mom asked was, does anybody want these what were they? Does anybody want these bronze? They were brass, this brass cook set. It's all sorts of brass pans and things she had hanging up in the kitchen on nails, right? And they were moving to a more modern place that didn't fit. Nobody wanted the brass cook set. Nobody wanted it. And she's like, "Oh, can somebody please take it?" This was my grandmother's.
Mm.
So my great grandmother's brass cook set. Still nobody wanted it. I mean, I made it a little more enticing, but still nobody wanted it. The one thing I took from the house when we moved out that day was a plastic free keychain that said Melrose Savings Bank on it,
Mm.
and it had a key, and that keychain was hanging in the garage on a nail. Every day for 20 years while the kids were growing up, either me or one of my brothers and sisters came home, went to the garage, took that keychain off the hook and opened the back door, let ourselves in. We played until the parents came home because
Mm.
they were both working.
Mm.
And so every day for I don't know, 20, 15, 20 years, either me or my brothers and sisters handled that keychain.
Mm.
And so I took that because it had meaning and
Sure.
connection and value.
Sure.
My mom's brass cooking set had no meaning, connection, or value because she didn't tell us, as we were growing up, that cook set was something her grandmother cooked with or used. And if she had told us that,
Mm.
it might have been a different story. So I encourage people to tell stories not only about themselves, but about things that might be important to them. Because if you don't tell us why it's important to you, like
Mm.
this brass cook set, it won't be important to us.
Yeah.
So that brass cook set is still in my mom's basement in a box. Um, but that keychain is hanging up next to my dog leashes and my car keys
Yeah.
at my house. And when
Yeah.
my brothers and sisters came over for dinner and saw that, they were jealous of that
Yeah.
plastic free
Mm.
keychain.
Mm.
And so talk about things, tell stories about things, let us know why they're important, because that's also part of your legacy.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great story, Jim. It has that symbolic, very personal meaning. And I know what also happens is when folks have their collection of books, their favorite book, those small books that had a really big impact on them and their career or their future or whatever. And the children don't want the books because they don't have that same meaning.
Yeah, they don't have a connection to, I mean, this generation maybe not even having a connection to books anymore,
The book,
right?
sure,
But
sure.
I mean, that's interesting. I would love to know what my dad and mom's favorite book were.
Mm.
My mom, she's still alive, but she reads books. It used to blow my mind. Like it would seem like she read a book every day. She was so fast at reading it.
Yeah, yeah.
My dad, not so much, but I would love to know what their favorite book was and if they
Mm.
had it. And then, I'd add that to my collection. Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So it's what you're trying to do is what you are doing is taking the life story and bringing meaning to that story because we might hear snippets, but you're capturing it all in one file, one folder, one file cabinet, whatever.
I try, right? That interview is really to capture as much
Yeah.
as we can in that 90
Yeah.
minutes. And it's not a complete picture though,
Yeah.
I like to think that, you know, your loved one stories matched up with maybe your aunts or your uncle's stories
Mm.
matched up with these objects and the stories around these objects I'm talking about. They all come together to paint this I like family mosaic. I like refer to it as this family mythology. They
Mhm.
all come together and they all work together. Now, the 90-minute interview or the movie we're going to record is a big part of that, but it doesn't stop there and it doesn't end there. You should be talking about everything
Mm.
and you know, it's all part of life and it's all a part of what makes your
Mm.
family and
Yeah.
it's important. It's all
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. So when we spoke earlier, we touched on artificial intelligence and
Yeah.
how this is really transformative for our contemporary world and culture. What do you think? How will AI have an impact on preserving legacy? Do you think there is a role for it?
There's definitely a role for it. I don't know if it's a good role or a bad role.
Mm,
AI, just think of how far AI has come since this time last year. We were talking about ChatGPT for the first time, like a year ago. And it has come so far in a year that it's scary.
mm,
Now we're talking about, taking a picture and making a video out of it and putting somebody's face on somebody else's face. I saw a video recently of a woman in Japan who had these virtual goggles on, and you could see the video in the video, you could see what she was seeing, but she was seeing her daughter, her deceased little daughter who was 8 or 9 years old,
mm,
and obviously having a very an emotional reaction to that. Obviously having, you know, a tough time with it, but maybe it helped her, maybe it didn't. I don't know. But that's the direction that we could go if we wanted to go there,
mm,
right? AI can clone somebody's voice. AI can clone somebody's voice and then also use artificial intelligence to have a conversation with somebody.
yes.
So imagine having a conversation on the phone with somebody passed away.
Mhm,
I call up, having a conversation with my dad who's passed away for a year, but he's still giving me advice.
mm,
I don't know if I like that or not,
yeah,
but that is
yeah,
something that could
yeah,
very well happen. And maybe
yeah,
it's beneficial for somebody
mhm,
and maybe it's not. But I think within a very short amount of time, we'll have that option.
mhm,
And, obviously the moral for me would be, make sure you record while you can, make sure you get the real deal while you can, because who knows, 10 years from now, you could be having a Zoom call with this AI version of your dad. And
sure.
I don't know if it's good or
Yeah,
bad. What do you
yeah.
think?
Well, I don't think I'd want my dad on a podcast, but you never know. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? I mean, it's got tremendous potential. I love ChatGPT. I use it all the time for so many different things. It's helping me figure out some of the technology with a new modem router in my house that I couldn't connect all my devices. It's just mind-boggling, the potential. But it has a lot of risks inherent in it. I wonder, you also touched on the use of these legacy videos in memory care. Do you see some benefit there where,
Well,
uh,
I try to partner with doctors and neurologists who are first diagnosing somebody that has early onset dementia or
mm,
Alzheimer's. And I
mm,
think I think if you're diagnosed with something like that, once you get your medical plan in place, once you figure out how you're going to deal with it, emotionally, I think it's a no-brainer at that point
mm,
to sit down with somebody like myself or your kids or your grandkids with their iPhones or whatever
yeah,
and get as much of your story down as you possibly can.
mm,
Because sometimes it takes years. My aunt just passed away from
mm,
Alzheimer's and she was suffering from it for 10 years. Sometimes it takes a long time, but sometimes it's quicker. And so you need to, like, once you are diagnosed, if you're able to, I just think it's a no-brainer to just start the process of
mm,
leaving your legacy, telling your story, recording yourself, go through your pictures, go through your albums. Um, I think one of my favorite ways to do it, Joe, if you're not doing video, is like everyone in my mom's generation seems to have shoe boxes full of
mm,
pictures, right? Loose
mm,
pictures. And if you flip over a picture, it'll say like, that they were pretty good about recording like a caption, this is Christmas 1966. And it's like, okay, that was Christmas 90. That's great. But
mm,
I would go through your boxes of pictures and the caption's great, but I would also just fill that picture with notes. It's easy, not just Christmas 1966, but like tell me what Christmas was like growing up. Tell
mm,
me who was there. Tell me, your favorite memories of it until you fill up that card all about Christmas.
yeah,
You know, and just keep going and just keep going, fill and go through that entire box. It's one of my
mm,
favorite ways to do it, and I encourage people to do that. But yes, I think to get back to your question, there's a role for it, and I think especially when you're first diagnosed, it's
mm,
something that's important to do.
yeah, yeah. It really adds another incentive to make the decision to start recording? I mean, we had a whole big shoebox, several shoeboxes of photographs after my parents passed away. And, a lot of the photographs, we didn't know who the people were because they were very old photographs.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
We were trying to understand and we didn't know. So having that background and that connection, not just the description of who it is, but maybe how that person fit into the family or the holidays or whatever. So that's invaluable. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give to someone who's considering a legacy video for themselves or for a loved one? Where do they start?
So, I would start by going to my website, going to my blog, legacyvideostories.com, and going to a couple of blog posts that have example questions. I have 30 to 40 questions on there that are pretty generic, but pretty valuable. And I would print those out. I would go over those with your loved one. I would add questions that seem to be more custom to them. I would get everybody else in the family on board with what you're doing.
Hmm.
um, Solicit questions from grandparents, I mean, you can make a really fun project out of it. Solicit questions from other people in the family,
Hmm.
come up with, what you're going to ask. Then I would sit down with them and I would go through it, and I wouldn't make it difficult. Don't make it difficult for yourself
Yeah.
because it doesn't have to be perfect. I know people might put it off because, oh, this isn't good enough yet, or I didn't like that answer.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be. It just
Mhm.
has to be there. So
Yeah.
um, don't get hung up on that. Don't get hung up on the process. Don't get hung up on, oh, this isn't good enough, or this isn't perfect,
Mhm.
or um, we don't have the right lighting or whatever. I think you can do it, by just having dinner and sitting around the table and talking about these kinds of questions and life questions. I came from a generation where might be kind of on the tail end of the generation, but we had dinner together every day. Every day we had dinner together and as a family. And that was, my friends didn't all do that, but we did. But that's not good enough because, what we talked about during dinner was what our day was like that day, what problems I was having in math class, um, what my soccer schedule was like, or my sister was telling us about, her play rehearsal. We weren't talking about important questions. Never
Mhm.
asked my mom who her best friend was growing up. I never asked my dad how he proposed to my mom around the kitchen table.
Mhm.
You talk about everyday stuff. So you can do this by making a point of talking about this. And there's I wish I had it. There's some things on Amazon you can buy um called I think one's called life interview questions or life
Yeah.
story questions. And they're basically just a bunch of cards that you go through like True Pursuit kind of cards, but they just have questions about your life where you can pick from early life to
Mhm.
midlife to late life. And they're
Sure.
all different and unique, but there's 300 questions.
Uh-huh.
Go through those as a
Yeah.
family one day, and make a game out of it and talk about them because and also when you're doing that, record the answers if you can,
Mhm.
just so you have it. But those are the kinds of things that you'll want to ask and you'll want to know about. You know, even families that did it right, even families that um eat together around the dinner table and you don't ask these kinds of questions in in
No.
those situations. You
Yeah.
just don't.
Yeah. So you recommend either coming up with our own questions, and they're really prompts for conversation, or you can go online, Amazon, or probably other sources, and find some prepared questions in advance, and you can use those.
You
Now,
can.
you prefer to, obviously, you like to do this locally. You don't travel to other states to record these videos. So can people do it online with you or?
They can. They can do it like, we're doing a Zoom call right now. We can see each other face to face.
Yeah.
People can do it online. We can do it via Zoom. There's y you know, I'm trained to do interviews. I've been doing them for a long time.
Mm.
I'm trained to ask the follow-up questions. I'm trained to kind of poke around a little bit. So that's one reason why you might hire me to do it,
Yeah.
via a Zoom call, and it's if I'm not there in person. But again, you don't have to use me to do it. I don't like you don't have to use a professional. Some of my videos that I go on location and shoot, the interviews conducted by a grandchild or a child. And
Oh.
that's actually a nice thing to do
Mm.
too, as well. The grandkid has a connection with the grandparent. It might not get the same results, it might not get the same exact answers, but it's a nice moment. It's a nice memory.
Mhm.
It's a nice way to spend 90 minutes. And, you know, they might open up with their grandkid a little bit more. They might not open up with their kid. There's no right or wrong way to do it.
Sure.
There's no right or wrong way to do it. You just got to do it. You just got to do it somehow, some way.
Yeah. 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 Just the process is more important than what it looks like. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Jim, thanks very much. It looks like we're out of time for today, but before we wrap up, I just want to remind my listeners to visit my website, livingto100.club, sign up for my email list, and download a free copy of my 9 tips to make living longer enjoyable. And if you're affiliated with a senior living setting, be sure to look for my new training manual, Better, Longer, and Happier. Jim Cosco, thanks so much for being a guest on our program. Your website again is legacyvideostories.com.
That's right. Thank you so much for having me, Joe. It was a pleasure.
Well, you're very welcome, Jim, and thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. Hope to see you next time.